Years ago, when I was a conservative evangelical youth pastor, I was in McMinnville, Oregon, what we McMinnvillites would belovedly call Mac. And my dad served on staff with me at this church in Mac. I was the pastor to the youth. He was the pastor to the seniors. Every week we would have these big staff meetings. And in these meetings, we would have our children's minister. We'd have our women's minister. We would have our small groups pastor. And we'd often have our office administrator in there too. These were big staff compared to like what we've got here. This church had started out in the living room of the lead pastor. It was a church plant, and it had grown to what is often referred to as large church size. That as a category is often defined as between 250 people, like on Sundays, regular attendees, and 1,000 people. You get past 1,000 people, you're in megachurch territory. And in this particular staff meeting, our lead pastor was presenting us with a problem. And the problem was that we had plateaued. We had plateaued at just 300 people. What a shame, right? He was really quite frustrated about this, but he had some solutions to present us with. And so he presented a number of strategies for us so that we could get to the next 100 people, you know? Strategies to help get us to 400 people, so we weren't stuck at 300. Throughout this meeting, my father was staring down at his feet. He was uncharacteristically quiet, and I could tell that he was mulling this all over. He had something on his heart. And he spoke up after our lead pastor had made his presentation, and he said, "What's wrong with being a church of 300 people? Following Jesus isn't supposed to be a popularity contest, right?" Our lead pastor flipped, turned beet red, his face was all contorted, and he started yelling at my dad, berating him in front of a room full of peers, a room full of friends, a room full of what we would often refer to as spiritual family, right? And he said a lot of things, most of which I don't remember. But he made one comment that has forever stuck in my mind. He said, "I will not be the pastor who got stuck at 300 people." And he said it with such disdain, like it would be the worst thing ever. And like these people who were coming, these people who are a part of our church, these people who trusted us, like they didn't matter, really. That they were incidental to this status of being another, a higher level of pastor. What we're talking about today is the cleansing of the temple passage that you can find a version of in all four gospel stories. And we're going to talk about some contradictions here before I come back to this other story I was talking about. And I did say contradictions. It's okay for the Bible to have contradictions. In fact, I would be troubled if somehow we worked out all the contradictions that are in it to make it all say the same thing. Because then we're not respecting the voices of our individual writers, right? They're all saying their own versions of events. They're all trying to make points. And it's important to see where they don't agree in order to see what that point might be. Just like, oh, what was that movie? It came up in a small group a few weeks ago. Vicky, I think you said what the movie was, where everybody's telling their own different, like, versions of events. And yeah, that one. Yeah, Rashomon. And people all have their own agendas in the telling of the story, right? So in the three synoptic gospels, that's Matthew, Mark, and Luke, this event, the cleansing of the temple, happens shortly before Jesus' arrest and execution. In fact, it is the inciting event. You could draw a straight line between that and his arrest and faux mock trial that leads to his death in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Because the cleansing of the temple is an act of protest in a world where protest is not allowed. It is calling out the religious leaders, the religious institutions, but also the leaders of public life, because these things cannot be neatly separated out in this time and place. Jesus goes into the temple, he flips over the tables, and he says, "You have made my Father's house a den of thieves." A den of thieves. Why a den of thieves? Because people come here to worship. They come to that temple to experience, to have an encounter with God in a place where they figure God's presence is, or at least is to a strong extent. It's an access point for the God that Jewish people all over the world love. So much so that they forsake months and months of income insecurity, taking care of their flocks or their gardens, their farms, or whatever their trade may happen to be, for the sake of coming to Jerusalem. Just like pilgrims do today, all over the world. I know one of us is gearing up for a pilgrimage. It takes a lot of prep work, right? Even more so in the ancient world. So you get there, you have to, it's pretty laborious to bring an offering all the way from home, months and months, over to the temple in Jerusalem. I mean, honestly, you're just trying to make sure you have enough food and money to get there yourself. You don't want to bring a lamb or two or three, depending on how wealthy you are. You don't even want to bring, say you're a poorer pilgrim, you only need to give like a dove or two. You don't want to bring a dove or two with you this whole trip, right? You got to feed them, make sure they stay alive in order for you to make the sacrifice. So you go into the temple and you're supposed to be able to make an exchange of currency, and then an exchange of that currency for an animal that is suitable to be sacrificed for God. This is an act of worship. This is an act of love and devotion to God. And the practice that Jesus is criticizing here in the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, is the exploitation that happens through the various levels of this supply chain. Because everything gets increased in value. It's expensive to have to do this. You get charged to exchange your money from Caesar imagery of the empire, over to what are like temple tokens, so to speak. Can only use it there in the temple because it's clean money. And then you get charged to be able to get this temple animal too. And it's, you get a premium for the luxury of the service. You get a premium for it being 100% okay to donate. So it makes a lot of sense that when Jesus is protesting and occupying that temple, he's calling out the thievery, the exploitation that is happening through this, as people are just seeking to sincerely worship God. But did you notice what's going on in John? This is in chapter 2 of the book of John. We got a lot of chapters left. So in this version, this is not one of the last acts of Jesus' public ministry. It's actually the first act of Jesus' public-facing ministry. This is kind of how he makes himself known to everyone. And this is like one of multiple trips to Jerusalem he makes. And apparently, this event is not the biggest of deals, because when he flips over the tables, kicks out all of the folks who would be profiting from this, and occupies the temple, you know what kind of resistance he's met with? Some harsh questions. How do you get off doing this? Who gives you the right? He just gets a talking to. That's it. There's no arrest. This does not lead to his death. In fact, in John's telling of the story, Jesus' death and execution happens like 3 years later. But by placing it here at the beginning of the book of John, right after or shortly after the transforming of water into wine, John's trying to teach something. He's trying to teach that Jesus is about transformation. Jesus is bringing about a reformation and a transformation of what our writer sees as worship that honors God, worship the way God would want it to be, and that which doesn't. But notice that in this act of protest, he doesn't call the temple a den of thieves. He calls it a marketplace. A marketplace. That's kind of without moral judgment, isn't it? A den of thieves obviously sounds bad, but a marketplace, that's got to be value neutral, right? But what happens in a marketplace? What do you do if you go to a market? Or if you're selling goods in a market? You're trying to make money, right? Yeah, so he's directly calling out here what I call the businessification of religion. That's what I see Jesus calling out in the book of John. The profiteering here. And I think that is something we all too easily gloss over in this text. Now, the businessification of Christianity is super common today. You turn on the radio, you're going to find several Christian music radio stations. Turn on the TV. You used to only have TBN. Now you've got multiple Christian TV stations, right? You go on to streaming, there's streaming. You could even find Christian edited versions of movies if you want that, right? Speaking of movies, there's an entire Christian movie industry. It's everywhere. When I was in Bible college, we had somebody who, we had a few people start up their own Christian clothing companies. We had a friend over a couple of days ago. They left a I Love Jesus sweatshirt at my house. It's still there, waiting for them in the closet. During the 90s, this was everywhere too. I mean, I remember What Would Jesus Do bracelets. And, you know, how many folks have like the Jesus fish bumper sticker, you know, especially the Jesus fish eating the evolution fish, eating the Jesus fish. Like, it just goes on and on. And I could spend a whole sermon talking about that, and I'm not going to. That's not the main thrust of what I want this message to be about. But I will encourage all of us to be thoughtful consumers. Think about what you're spending your money on. Think about what you're spending your attention on, you know? If you're following Christian influencers, that's fine, but I hope you look deeply, see what they care about. And if it's something that you find to be opposed to the heart of God, consider what you're doing with your clicks and your views and your money. What I want to talk about is the businessification of church. Because that's what was happening at the church that I came from. The church I was talking about in Mac. At some point along the way, and I think we actually started off this way, but I didn't really see it, we were so focused on evangelism, so focused on conversion, that was our main purpose in being. If you asked us what our mission was, every one of us who had been there for longer than a month would tell you, well, we are disciples who make disciples who make disciples. And there really was no end to that. No wonder our lead pastor was so frustrated about plateauing at 300 people. There never would be a number we could arrive at that he would be satisfied with, because at our core, Christianity, in his view, is supposed to be about recruitment, 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 growth, growth, growth. So many of our American Christian churches today are obsessed with this. And not just growing in number, but growing in money, give, and growing in influence. And so, they utilize all of these abilities that they've learned from the CEOs amongst us, the business world. They utilize every capitalistic tool available to them. A couple of years after I left, my father had finished over at that church. And one day I'm over celebrating Christmas, probably, with them. And I learned that our church, our former church, had been given away. Our lead pastor functioned as CEO. We had lifetime appointee elders who did what he said. You think of them as lifetime, well, co-CEOs, lifetime board appointees. And he wanted to move on. And so he gave our church to a megachurch down the street. Well, by down the street, I mean in Newburgh, like about 10, 15 minutes away. They became a satellite congregation. And like a hostile takeover, the folks who were all on staff before, gone. Just gone. Now, if you go to that location, you'll get the same product being pumped into the church in Newburgh over in McMinnville. Why? Well, because it works. It's effective. We're disciples who make disciples who make disciples. This obsession with growth is hurting so many in our country. It's damaging us. I wish we were focused on a growth of soul and not a growth of number, a growth of money, a growth of influence. We're losing ourselves to this as a nation. So that's what I want to talk about. The corporatization of churches, the businessification of churches. Churches hold events every single week that are called worship services, and they bring in the best music. It's a concert every single week, and a well-done one at that, with lights that make you feel things, and bass you feel right in your lungs. And when the preacher speaks, the message is entertaining and reassuring for whatever it is that you may be drawn there for. For many, the pastors are there selling a Jesus that they find the most compelling, a Jesus that they find the most attractive. So if you want cool Christ, there's going to be a mega church or a large church that has it for you. If you would rather have your own personal Jesus, well, they've got that too. And they'll sing all of the Jesus is my boyfriend music you want. If what you really want is a strong Jesus, a might makes right Jesus, a macho Jesus. There's so many of those for you, right? Make you feel all good about your masculinity. If you would rather have a Jesus that makes you rich, well, he's out there too. And what I see happening all around us, what I see particularly disconcerting today in the city of Portland, throughout the state of Oregon, throughout our country, is the increasing appeal of a nationalist Jesus. A Jesus who blesses all of your bigotry and tells you, actually, you know what? The people who are different from you, they're the ones who are wrong. Have you considered changing them? What if we legislated change for them? What if we made sure to put them in their place? But I don't see this self-interested Jesus, this selfish Christ in our New Testament. I see this Jesus in the book of John criticizing a selfish religious institution that props up prophets over people. And too easily we miss that. Because the music is so good. And the sermons, they make me feel a way. And have you seen their store? Their store. You could buy every branded piece of merchandise from their store so that every moment of your day you're reminded that you're a part of Mega Church CR. We all want a place to belong. We all want a group to belong to. And I see the mega churches cleaving onto that as well. So many of us, why are we drawn to Instagram and social media and everything else? Because we're lonely. Because we want a place to belong to, and we're finding that online. Why do we go to churches? Often, it's because we want community. And if you find a community that has thousands and thousands of people, well, maybe you'll find a friend there. Maybe you won't feel so small in this world. Maybe you'll feel like you actually do have the ability to do something that matters. I get the attraction. I was there. I've been a part of that system. And I know many of us in this room have too. And we've left it. But that's so much of the draw right now. And I think we've got to see it. We've got to call it out. We've got to resist it. Hillsong, having earned millions and millions from their churches and from the church music they were selling, aims to change Australian governance to benefit their versions of Christianity. And you know what? They succeeded. They were game changers for Christian culture in Australia and in the States. Bethel Church has largely taken over the culture and economy of Redding, California. And they continue to seek to grow their influence. Sean Foyt, who is a former worship pastor from there, toured the country ginning up the far-right worshipers during COVID in what he called the Let Us Worship movements. And now we're seeing more and more folks take pages from those playbooks. Why does any of this matter? We're not at one of those churches, right? Well, I think it matters because we're charged with, we're given the blessing of sharing peace with one another and with our neighbors, right? Right now, these are the loudest voices in the room. And I think it's something we have to resist by continuing to show up at protests, continuing to show up at events, continuing to show up at our dinner tables during awkward holiday gatherings. Because folks need to know that Jesus is more than whatever their pet bias happens to be, and cares about more than just a religious experience they have every week. And we need that reminder too. Because it's too easy, I think, for us to seek to learn from these mega churches, since they're the biggest and the loudest ones, and they're pumping out so many books. We can't lose ourselves in this either. Mega churches went from being in the 300s in the 1990s to about 1,800 today. Large churches, so 250 plus, and mega churches, 1,000 plus, are now 10% of the church landscape in America, and 70% of regular churchgoers, folks who go once a month or more, go to those churches. According to, let me make sure I got this right. According to a stat I'll get you later. But think about that, 70% of regular churchgoers are going to those churches. And I think some of us are feeling that when we go out to coffee. I hear you say, like, when did things get to this point? Why are things at this point? I think it's because of the attraction and the shrinkage of smaller churches and people going to these bigger churches. And we could be drawn to, like, well, what works for them could work for us, but let's refuse to do that. Let's learn from megachurches, not by adopting their corporatizing in the hope of growing like them, but by refusing to compromise the love of God and neighbor, even if it's unattractive, even if it's unpopular. Let us care about growth, but let it be the growth of soul, the growth of hearts, the growth of love. Let us care about our finances, but only as a means to the work of mutual care with and for our neighbors. Otherwise, why are we here? We could just go to the megachurch down the street. Let us use the influence we have, not for the sake of self-interest, but for the well-being of our neighbors and ourselves. A Portland where people have food and water and shelter, regardless of their religious views. Where people have health care and child care and retirement. A Portland where people are safe and flourishing regardless of their religion or their citizenship or their race or their gender or their sexual identity. This is what transformation looks like. This is what water being turned into wine looks like. This is what we're working for.